for those 2 years, they should be at construction. Okay?
So let me ask this question then, because I'm always curious about this. So they come in with their proposal for a site plan proposal and development. Of course, we go through and we do the concurrency report at that time. And so how did you determine, just looking at their plans, how do you determine whether it's a need for high school, elementary, or middle school? And just looking at a site plan and making that determination.
Oh, there's calculations.
Yeah,
Yeah.
well,
Yeah.
yeah, and then at the
Essentially-
same time, they got, okay, they start the process today, okay, would have 3 years to develop. Of course, the capacity rating and everything can change within that 3 years as well, right?
Well, and that's one of the reasons why concurrency isn't generally triggered until
Right.
later in the process.
Process?
Right, so that you come in at rezoning, and I will tell you as a planner, I have seen, developments that were rezoned prior to the recession in 2007, suddenly resurrected, 15 years later. If they had capacity reservation in 2007, it would be completely null and void come
Okay.
2015 or later. Sorry, I don't know how that works.
Hold it down.
You're good. And so, that's why the cities or the local governments set the final development order. A lot of cities, and I'll tell you, the ladies are better at the details than I am, but most of them will not trigger concurrency until you come to something like final plat. Or if it's an apartment complex, site plan approval. So, it is later, and so that's how one of the ways that we're making sure that the capacity is available concurrent, which is the definition of school concurrency, with the impacts of that development.
So we've had 2 projects as of late that came through with proportionate share agreements, and neither of them have broken ground. What I heard you say is they have 2 years to break ground. What happens if they don't break ground within 2 years of our proportionate share agreement?
Well, we definitely coordinate with the local government to see if they've obtained any approvals within that time period, and if they've gone forward in a good faith effort. So we're looking to see that they're doing something. If they have not done anything, and it gets to the 2 years, it's expired.
So they have to pay
come
again?
back through the process.
They have to start
They have to
fresh.
start over, okay? And that available, that capacity that they're holding with their reservation goes back out into that pool. So, and everything's on a first come, first served basis. So if there are other projects waiting to be analyzed, they can take up that capacity.
And what happens to the funds that they've paid?
The funds that they paid would be refunded.
It would be refunded if
It would
they
be
had paid. A
refunded.
lot of
Yeah, if
them
they paid.
generally would not have, the proportionate share mitigation agreement, they don't immediately turn around and pay us funds, right?
Got it.
A lot of them, it will come, there's a time frame that they pay us, and a lot of it is based on when they actually start construction. So their proportionate share mitigation agreement can expire without them ever having paid us anything. If they have paid us something, they would get refunded.
100%?
Oh,
You
it
do 'em
depends
all?
on what payment they, if it's
Yeah.
phased, no, they paid us phase 1, they don't.
But I mean, yeah. So
Now-
I'm looking for a potential, because one of the challenges we faced as a council is encouraging the development to actually move forward. And so I like hearing that you have a timeline.
Oh, we watch, we
Because
monitor.
that's a good thing. I think we're all in agreement. We want these projects, once approved, to move forward. I would have been happy to hear you say you didn't give them all of it back, because then they'd have an incentive above our own requirements to move
I
it
think it's
forward.
statute that we,
Statutory.
yeah, that we have to do that. Now, I will say,
there's some incentive for them, because otherwise they.
Can we hear from our
But
in-house expert?
that, go ahead.
We have, I believe the school has divided it, I'm not sure.
We have a
Development
timeline.
submit a, state of emergency plan to us that extends it out to
Yes.
2 years. So on top of the 2 years,
they
it's
go
twice.
back to back.
That's what I was gonna bring up.
So,
Yeah,
sorry.
yeah.
Well, I
Okay,
was
No,
going,
you're good.
And that's good, I didn't bring that up because that has happened. What we do is, we would tell the applicant to request the time extension through the local government. If the local government approves it, then the school concurrency is extended also.
Of course, Carrie, that extension is based on our timeline, what we give them when we first approved the plans anyway, right? Because normally we put a timeline on that anyway.
Correct.
And everything.
But it can get extended.
Yeah, well, we can get extended, so all that can be extended out from the original timeline that we put on.
Okay, I also want to note that our school board attorney has made a determination that the proportion share mitigation agreements are not subject to that emergency orders, the executive orders. So they can't extend the proportionate share. They can extend concurrence of capacity reservation. Okay.
I mean, they can ask you, they can ask.
Right.
But it's not compelled under the Florida statute the way that we're compelled. Yeah.
I'm sorry.
No, it's all right.
Go ahead.
Good questions. I think it makes for a much more interesting conversation.
Okay.
And then we can hit on all the points of interest. I was gonna say just to drive home, we follow the city's expiration dates, so we're again working together as partners with the city or with the county, whichever municipality it is. And we're constantly communicating with the planners in the different cities and say, oh, has this project submitted for this or that, or have they gotten this approved? So we're hopefully working generally all on the same page. The capacity, it is released for a project or becomes available in that CSA once the plat is either recorded or final site plan is implemented, so construction starts. The capacity reservation expires, so we were just talking about they only have so long to develop the project and have that capacity reserved. Or when a school capacity project is indicated within the first 3 years of the district's 5-year capital plan, so a new school or classroom addition. That's not like an upgrade to a school facility, but where
Okay.
you're adding.
Let me explain that a little bit more. So when we have a capital project in our capital plan, and it's a capacity project for us, we can't use that capacity in our CSA pools until it gets into the 3rd year or forward, because then it's committed for us. If it's out there in the 4th and 5th year, that is not available capacity.
So you're 3 or 4 years out from building it, is what you're saying?
No, in our capital plan.
Okay. in
So
your
our
capital.
5-year
Okay.
capital plan, if the project makes it to the 3rd, 2nd, or 1st year,
Okay.
that means it's committed for us. If it's in the 4th and 5th, it is not, and we do not use that.
Okay.
Okay.
One of the other things that I think seems counterintuitive to a lot of people is why we release capacity when the plat is
true.
recorded or the final site plan goes forward. And that is because at that point, the students that we expect to generate from that development are actually worked into our enrollment projections. And so basically then that capacity is absorbed through our enrollment projections, and then, we see it as non-available capacity through that process. So hopefully that makes a little bit of sense, but, people are like, well, why are you releasing capacity when they're actually building? And it's because then we see those students on the other side of that ledger sheet.
So just to walk you through a bit of the process that the applicants for the projects go through, they don't have to, but they can submit an application for an adequate public facilities determination. Generally, that would be earlier on in their process, say at that rezoning stage, or when they're talking with the city about they're doing a pre-submittal conference. They're still pondering their project feasibility, what the costs may be that they'll incur with it. So with this adequate public facilities determination, it does not issue a reservation for capacity, but it gives them a snapshot of where things are looking at that time. If they were to, at that moment, submit for a reservation, even though they're not at that stage to be ready for it yet. And that specific development, again, it's just informational, giving them idea of where things are looking. Maybe the high school is close to capacity there, or there's plenty of capacity at the high school. That way they can plan where they're gonna move forward with the project. And this is actually a snapshot of the APF that was issued for the lumberyard district project. So they started with submitting for an adequate public facilities determination.
And these are helpful to us because it gives us an idea of that development very early on in the process, so that we can, kind of track it through our mapping, through our development process and get an idea. We like to know as early as possible.
So here the,
Except for the developers.
True.
Yes, true.
Right, there's a benefit on both sides. Definitely.
so here that student generation rate that we were talking about earlier, that's where we've got this magical formula that tells us, okay, this many of this type of home, we're predicting it'll produce this many students. And every 4 years, we reevaluate that as part of an impact case study update. This is only including the traditional school students, so that doesn't look at charter, private, homeschool, or any virtual. We actually don't know where some of the students end up going, if they're, say, homeschooled or private school, charter school. This also doesn't include age-restricted units, and for age-restricted, those have to be with a deed restriction that's recorded with the county.
It has to be approved by the county attorney. There's a process to the county attorney. Once it's approved by the county attorney, we will honor that. It's different. This is a 55 plus,
Right.
a real 55 plus, not a developer that markets to 55 plus, okay? They would still be subject to the process and
Thank-
impact.
Thank you for answering that, because that's one of the questions I had.
Okay.
For the 55 community, how they calculate it out, okay? So, but they're not including it, if they're a true 55 community, plus.
Yes,
50.
has to be true. Also, short-term rentals are exempt, and they have to be approved by the county attorney also, and they need a recorded deed restriction. So we're seeing a lot of that in our South County area down here, so.
What is the presumed school size for the reference? Just a wonderful reference, thank you for that, that's very helpful. The 7,000 units is one elementary school or K-8. How many students are we presuming will be in each school? Is there a standard that we've adopted?
So that actually goes back to your comment about school sizes, right? So the district's prototype school sizes are 940 for an elementary school. I think it's 1,250 for a middle school and 2,000 for a high school. And we can talk about the size of schools. I think the educators would agree that smaller is generally better, right? But Dr. Howard from his time will tell you that the school finance structure is basically built for larger schools, right? So in order to operate a school, the more students, I won't say the more students the better, there's a sweet spot there. But those are kind of the numbers that, in order to effectively operate a school and to offer all of the things that we want to be able to offer at our schools, that's kind of where they have money.
And that gets into sports and everything else. So it's a big, so when I was there for Lake Minneola, and we're going back 14 years, we spent over $4 million just on the athletic complex. So it was, and the reason I remember that is because it was shocking to me. I was like, oh my gosh.
And I will tell you, that was a deal. at the time.
And looking back now, you're like, oh, that was good, but at the time, it was shocking that there was that much in there, and that the economy of scale comes into that, and that you have to have certain sizes to trigger certain things within that school envelope. So you don't necessarily get the bells and whistles that students would like unless you get to that size. And so that's how Aurelia Cole has, I don't know if you've toured it yet, Aurelia Cole has amazing programs, but it's that size that gives them that ability to do that, and so that, but that's it.
Right.
You know, their dance program and all the programs they have in there are triggered in part because of the size that they are.
Yeah.
And that
And
makes sense.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, that makes sense to me. I think as I sit here looking at, when I'm talking to developers who want to do projects and thinking as the diverse community that we have, you know, some parents may not have a choice and they need the public school systems. Other parents have the luxury of choice. And so how can we as a council support you in your efforts and also support all the variations and diverse community that we have in Clermont? And if we allow or encourage or require a school space on large projects, for example, you know, I'm looking at this and saying, based on that, you're going to have one high school in the Wellness Way region because they're looking at 20,000 homes.
Right.
And that's quite a large space for one large high school. But I understand your point. And so my question is, as we sit here and we look at projects, there are other solutions, and I know sometimes they're triggering I see the teachers on social media. I get it. I'm not trying to do that. There are other solutions with charter schools and private schools that if we create a space for those to come in and create other options, you know, is that something that helps the community? And that's not to take away from the public school what it's doing. It's that creating more opportunities for walkability or small school or special needs that some students might have. So I'm just looking at it kind of at the big picture that way. And it's helpful to know what kind of the system is for the public school system so that we can support it. Yeah. So thank you for that.
Totally important.
So school concurrency, level of service, and the available capacity. There is a fun word we use in school districts called fish, which is not the fish that people usually think of, where I just say level of service being 100% of permanent fish capacity. That is the Florida Institute of School Houses. So they have
Inventory. Florida inventory of schoolhouses.
And I will tell you, that's a whole nother
Yes.
hour-long presentation on school capacities. So just fish. It's the way that the state makes us calculate how big is the capacity of a school.
So there's I should say, a whole determination in there. And that available capacity is the permanent capacity. So if you're adding temporary student stations, such as with portables, then yeah, that doesn't get counted into it. I'm gonna defer to the expert on
Okay,
detailed
I will go over
explanation
it.
of it.
I am the fish person.
In multiple ways.
Kelly used to be the fish
I
person.
used to be the fish person.
So the level of service is 100% of fish capacity, and what that is permanent capacity. That's the building itself, what's inside. It is not counting portables. Okay, so our level of service itself can go 25% over, so 125% of the fish, fish capacity. Or our core capacity, whichever is smaller. So if we calculated 125% of a fish capacity for a school and it was 800, but our core capacity was only 700, then that level of service would be 700, believe it or not, it's larger. Okay, and that's exactly what I said. And then the available capacity I was looking at reading. The available capacity determination is that available capacity minus the seats needed for the project itself to serve that project. That calculation can be a negative, which means we don't have those seats and we offer the proportionate share. Or it's a positive, and then they use that capacity. That capacity is reserved for their project. It comes out of that pool of capacity. And they are given a capacity reservation letter. So the capacity reservation letter is their school concurrency. If they have to do proportionate share mitigation and they have an agreement, as you have agreements come before you, that approved and recorded proportionate share mitigation agreement serves as the school capacity for that project. So it's going to be an either or, okay? So it's both of them are the same.
So this is an example of that capacity reservation when we issue it or cannot issue it. We get a report from essentially a software program that we use, I would call it, that gives us that number of what the demand for that project is as far as student seats in each of the schools, as well as the capacity that's available. So this one is from Lumberyard District, and it's probably a little tough to see it on actually the screen. Maybe on your printout you can see it, but the high school had a negative number for available capacity. So that's where for that project they didn't have enough capacity to get a reservation. We gave them the option of doing a mitigation agreement. They chose to do so, and that's why you then saw that mitigation agreement before you.
What would the other option have been?
They could have denied the mitigation agreement, and then they could not have moved forward with the project because they wouldn't have had school concurrency.
So the other option would be change your design and have fewer units.
Correct. And that's happened. That has happened with a couple projects we've reviewed. The other option, if they don't take the option to do the proportionate share mitigation, then the school concurrency is denied on our end.
And so just, I understand the CSA, so let's use the lumberyard, it was on there,
Okay.
and that was one of the two that came to us. I don't mean to pick them out, and if they hear about this, then it was easy. They're in the orange CSA, and you don't have enough high school seats for their project, so they've paid the concurrency. Are we then saying those students, or perhaps the students that are on the east side of the orange CSA, someone in the orange CSA is gonna have to go to the pink CSA?
No,
The
it doesn't
CSAs
affect
are
students
separate-
at all.
Yeah, the CSAs are separate from attendance boundaries.
Correct.
So basically what would happen is the money that Lumberyard pays in goes to the new Wellness Way High School. We build our new Wellness Way High School, which is in the fifth year of our current 5-year plan. And then at that point, we would do an attendance boundary change for the entire South County, right?
Oh.
And so
Yes,
that
it's gonna
opens up
affect a lot.
capacity at Eastridge High School. Eastridge then relieves Lake Minneola High School. It kind of becomes a domino effect through the South County high schools, right? And so what could happen is that the students at Lumberyard are then rezoned to Lake Minneola High School. Or the boundary changes somewhere else, and so then they stay at South Lake High School. But I'm assuming they're zoned for South Lake High School. I think that was what I saw earlier. Yeah, so basically it all occurs when the new Wellness Way, or whatever that capacity project is, when that goes into effect, right? And we open up capacity somewhere.
This might be a rabbit hole question, but I'm curious. There used to be a Clermont High School, and now there's not. What happened back? Why don't we have city high schools
That really is a rabbit hole. That was way before I got to the district, let me tell
It's
you.
been a long time,
So,
right? But
it
it's
was,
a thing here, the Highlanders.
I want to
and-
say it was 1992 because we did a lot of that research when we built a really full academy, and apparently it was incredibly controversial. Mayor, you probably lived through that. But yes, I think that was well, first of all, you had a couple of schools that were not, again, it's that size concept, right? That basically there is a certain size that's kind of a sweet spot for a high school in order to be able to offer everything that they wanted. You had two very smaller high schools and a growing area.
Right.
And so, I wasn't on the school board, I wasn't working for the school board, I was barely out of college. So don't blame me on this one.
No, it's just
But the
curiosity.
decision was made to combine those two high schools into, or initially it was South Lake High School,
Right.
was built, which is
Clermont
why
and
it's
Groveland.
South Lake, right? So that was built, and then I want to say about 10 years later, because of the continued growth, they built East Ridge High School. And then again, because of that continued growth, we built Lake Mineola High School. I think it opened in 2011. And actually, one of the things that has happened since then is so both of those schools, or actually at this point, all three of those schools have gotten additions. So as growth happened, they added first, I want to say, to South Lake, and actually South Lake and East Ridge about the same time when I came to the district in 2007. I think both of those opened. We opened Lake Mineola High School because I don't know if anybody was here, but if you remember back at East Ridge High School, there were 2 portable fields. And then we opened Lake Mineola High School, and then actually since then we've placed an addition on Lake Mineola High School. What we did when the addition opened at Lake Mineola, instead, because we knew that there was a lot of growth in that area, but we had some capacity to fill, rather than change the attendance boundary, we just opened up our educational choice process for a couple of years, and allowed students to attend Lake Mineola High School. We've had to start shutting that down because of the growth in that area. So,
Yeah, and I-
probably a long answer to your question.
No, I think of it as from a sense of pride and a sense of place and community pride and feeling like you have a home. I think the idea of having a local high school that has your city name is really romantic, and I'm just, go watch the local high school football game, and
It is, but it becomes really difficult from, an attendance boundary perspective, right? So you have all these areas around it that are unzoned or that are unincorporated county. And so, how you accommodate those students, and then just size. So a very large city like Clermont, we can't have a high school that every single Clermont student could attend, right? It would be a extremely large, extremely unwieldy high school.
free at
So,
this point, yeah.
I think what happened at the time when they built South Lake High School was that first of all, they couldn't keep expanding the site that, it's tight enough with a really full academy, which is, 1,400 K-8 students. They couldn't keep expanding that to a middle school, or to a full high school like we would want to offer. And so they had to find a larger site. At that time, I mean, if you think back to 1992, the cities down here were really still pretty small. And so they weren't producing enough students to, they were kind of at a maximum for where they were at, but yet they weren't producing enough students at that point to be able to go build a larger high school for each of them on 2 different sites. I mean, kind of having been in school planning, I feel for them at that point, right? Is
Yeah.
that they were in a tough position because what they had between the 2 high schools was enough students to fill a larger high school. And so, they made that, probably it was a really hard decision. I have heard some pretty bad horror stories about trying to combine those 2 that were historic rivals
Right.
into one school.
Yeah.
And so, they made a hard decision based on the funding and the student numbers that they had
So are the
I
cities
understand both
involved?
sides of it, but.
So going back to that, part of the reason was, it's when they had split schools, or split times, so you had kids going to school for several weeks, and then they'd be out, and then the other
That's
set
right,
would
they had
come
one
in.
year-round
And
school.
then by the time they decided to combine into South Lake High School was growing so fast, they ended up turning the ninth grade center into what is Aurelio called now. So part of the reason they don't build that is it's fungible. And I don't know if you guys will get to it, but when you look at their extended plans, they'll have, and it was A, B, C's, D's, it might be DFs now, but they'll have schools planned out 20 and 30 years just by a designation. And we know, so they'll say, okay, we know growth is going here, we need this in here, and if the property comes up or if something's there, but there's so much planning so far out that it's, and that's part of the reason that they've talked about that at 5 years, things can be moved around. Once you get to 3 years, you're pretty much pinned in, and you're like, okay, this is happening.
Yeah.
There were things that we did, so I just saw Fruitland Park opened up. That was something that we did before I left, so that was planned more than 10 years ago, and it was just a rebuild of an existing elementary school. So, but a lot of that is just because they're so far out as far as planning goes, that they can't. But here locally, that was the problem, was that people were tired of kids being on split programs. You had you had brothers and sisters on different paths. So it was a really difficult time. So, I mean, I don't feel sorry for the folks that were here when they had to make that decision, but that was the decision that probably needed to be made. And I don't see how you could go back into individual high schools, because Clermont would have multiple high schools right now.
I think I was too quick to agree with that statement, because I think the slide said 20,000 homes for a high school, and we have 16,000 in Clermont right now. And Wellness Way is slated for, is that right? 20,000 units?
20,000, that's why they've also asked for one high school, one middle school, and three elementaries in the Wellness Way
Right.
area.
So, I mean, I understand the county, the school board is the county.
Right.
I have the benefit of just representing the citizens of Clermont, so I can,
You also have to be able to get 90 acres for a high school right now,
So,
Six.
ideally
80.
80. So, yeah, so now you're looking for a very large chunk of property. And so in the Wellness Way, I believe that they were looking for that size, and then it dropped back to 60, and that's giving them heartburn.
So Mineola High is on 60
60
acres,
acres.
and that is very, very tight.
Is Eastridge 90?
Eastridge is closer to 90.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, Eastridge actually has a really good size site.
that's a town.
And we were looking for.
80 acres is a walkable town.
In Wellness Way, I know we were just trying to find 60 acres down there, because.
And I
We're
would tell you,
still
we are still
trying.
looking for 60 acres
And
down there.
that's the other
So,
problem.
If anybody has it and wants to, anybody in the audience? No?
So that's the other problem, when I go back to what you were questioning earlier about building all these other schools and everything, where are you gonna get the land? That's one of the serious problems we have right now, is acquiring land to build schools with. And so we had to bear a minimum at 60 acres for a high school. I know they want 80 acres, but 60 acres is kind of small for high schools these days.
It is, and I will tell you, my athletic director's like, well, if we could have an extra practice field, or maybe 2 practice fields, I'm like, we're gonna be lucky if we have 1. So, yeah, there's a lot of demands for a high school, and space demands, period, just in development in Florida. I mean, but between the stormwater requirements, between the athletic requirements, the building itself is usually the smallest part of that, right? It's parking, it's parent stacking, you have drop off, at a high school, you have all of that extra parking requirement for the students. And then just stormwater, when you get to that size, becomes a land.
So,
What is the,
not to get too far off the
Anyway,
subject,
yes,
but
yes.
you triggered something just now that I was gonna ask you about anyway later on, but stacking, you mentioned stacking. Is there another requirement, a bill or something, they trying to do something that require something with stacking with your schools now? I think I heard the other
I'm
day.
not familiar with
Because
anything.
people are complaining about having people
Yeah.
parking in front of their homes and everything. I just heard something the other day, something about, they trying to introduce a bill about stacking or something.
I heard something about that as well.
So,
All right, so, yeah.
Is that the state level?
huh?
The state level?
Yeah, well, I happened to be passing my TV, it was on, and I heard it, I tried to run back and take exactly what they was talking about.
Okay.
But it was concerning stacking at schools, and my understanding, what little bit I heard, is the fact that, they wanna, I guess, get a bill basically saying, hey, you're not gonna be able to stack, cars along, people, in front of people's homes and things like that, which would means, that put a bigger requirement on you when you're building your schools.
That would be an even larger piece of land.
See?
Because, it is one of the things that just amazes me is how long people will sit in line to pick up their child.
Right.
They will show up 3 hours early and sit there for 3 hours.
Oh.
So, yeah.
What is the acreage for a middle school and elementary school? Do you have a,
So generally, we say for middle school or K-8, they're kind of similar, it's 35 to 40 acres. And for an elementary school, usually we look for about 20 acres. We can go a little bit smaller, but there has to be some accommodation somewhere else. So like at the site in Wellness Way that we acquired for the elementary school, it's 15 acres, but there is off-site retention as part of that development that Lennar is doing. And so,
how many acres does anyone know? Kurt, heads up. Does anyone know how many acres the overall Wellness Way community is? All 20,000? All of it, county?
15,000.
So we're looking at roughly 10% that needs to be allocated towards schooling.
No. 15,000 acres, we, for the, what?
Oh, 1%, yeah, we
We less than
150
1%,
acres.
yeah, less than 1%, because if you take what they're asking, elementary school, at 20 acres per elementary, you're only looking at 60 acres for 3 elementary, about 40 acres for a middle, so that's 100.
Let's say we need
And then
two,
another
so-
100, so about 180 acres, 190 acres total for all the schools.
Yeah, let's
So
just do
out
another
of
middle school.
15,000 acres, you're, ooh, very, very little.
Yeah, so 2% of the land is what we're looking
Not
for.
even 2%,
Yeah.
not even 1%. Yeah.
Is there a reason we can't support that with development
Well,
requirements?
the developers
So-
own it, we can't make them sell, okay, and I'm surprised, I just heard that, I thought we was at a deal with, you was at a deal with, for the high school, that we've been working on.
So what happened with that is that basically once we, there were road issues, there were traffic issues.
Right.
There's also, wetland.
Because of the
and
location,
basically
yeah.
it just became too small a site.
Mhm.
So, so it wasn't the developer said he wasn't willing to continue working with us, it was that it was too small a site for a high school. And it was a very irregular site, and so it, once our design team went back and really looked at that site, it just didn't work for us.
And with the roads, and everything not being, I guess we was trying to get some of the roads down there reallocated as roadways and not, right-of-ways and all this, so it was,
One of the big things for site selection is to make sure that there's ingress and egress, and we ran into this with
Huge.
Grassy Lake and Mineola Charter. You had 2 schools with a capacity of well over 1,000 each, and they were bringing parents in on a 2-lane residential road for both of those schools, and it really became problematic for a very long time, and until they 4-laned Hancock. And so before they 4-laned Hancock, then you had Lake Mineola High School coming in on those same 2. So you had massive 4,000 students coming in on a 2-lane residential road into those 3 schools. And so I will tell you that when I sat up there, I'd rather purchase the right land than have somebody give it to you. And that's often what you find. They found that at the hills of Mineola. They were trying to give them a piece of land that really doesn't work. And sometimes the school has to be thankful and say, well, thank you for that land. But sometimes it's really a poor place to be planning a school at.
So I will also say there have been a lot of changes in the legislation, and very difficult for us to, well, extract, or, for local governments to extract land on our behalf even.
Right.
It was a lot easier through the DRA process, and even now, I think, our attorney basically interprets that we can't accept donated land without some kind of credit to that developer. And so it has become much more difficult to get land, unfortunately. If anybody finds that magic wand, please feel free to share it or use it on our behalf. I don't
I've
care.
looked at you 3 times, because you know where my heart is on this one.
All right, Kelly, maybe use this, but now I remember where I heard it at about the stacking. It was House Bill 569. It pertained more to charter schools, though. I made a note of it, and it's talking about a stacking ordinance. So you may want to.
Okay, 569.
You're on those statutes. I love it.
Well,
love it.
well, I was on the call yesterday morning, and that's one of the things that came up. House Bill 569, charter school, and I wrote down real quick. One of the comments was about stacking in the ordinance.
You know what, I do think, if I remember that, it is that you can't put additional requirements on a charter school than you would on a public school. But we will go back and
That
definitely
was my first time
reread
hearing
that.
of it, and I just quickly, it caught me by
Yeah.
surprise, and I quickly made a note of
No,
it.
we will
Okay.
definitely, it is this year, I think we have more groups watching the bills because there are a lot of bills that are affecting
Yeah.
us and have the potential to affect us. But we will definitely go back because of course they also change, it seems like daily
Yeah.
or hourly sometimes. So we'll go back and take a look at that as well. Okay, so, no worries. Back to the concurrency process.
I think we've been pretty much covering what the process is throughout the discussion. So this chart gives you a good overview of what you're looking at as far as the process they go through. They submit the application requesting a school concurrency capacity reservation. Then it comes down to either yes or no, there's capacity. If not capacity, just in summation, we do offer the proportionate share mitigation process. They can either take that offer and move forward with the mitigation, or they don't. If they don't take it, they're denied the concurrency. If they do, they can move forward. And that proportionate share mitigation agreement serves essentially as their school concurrency for the project. Pretty much discussed everything else on here, I would say. Just overview of the proportionate share mitigation. So we know already, I believe, what gets us to meeting that proportionate share mitigation. Not enough capacity in the schools to serve that project, and the students that are expected to come from that project. The amount they have to mitigate is a number that is resulted from the number of seats needed to serve that development by the cost per student station. We have a cost actually per student station, elementary, middle, and high school. So that is from the Educational School Facilities Impact Fee Study. Then that mitigation results in a recorded agreement, so that's actually recorded in Lake County Public Records, and again, that serves as the capacity reservation for that project, so they can move it forward. As Helena touched on earlier, the payments for that proportionate share mitigation are directed to a specific project in the capital plan. It doesn't just go into one big pot for as well. It actually goes to a specific project. Then those payments, they are a credit to the school impact fees for that project. Just a little recap, refresh. These are the South Lake County area concurrency service areas. Clermont is in CSA 12.
Oh, yes.
purplish color. 13 is an orange. Got 14 over here, and then that is 16. So 15. I couldn't remember the exact number, and it is covered by the legend. We don't have a whole lot of action generally in CSA 15. There's only one elementary school in that CSA actually. This is just
No,
looking at,
these are existing schools in the CSAs.
and this is just looking at currently in the southern Lake County area to zoom in on it for you. Here's our contact information, should you want to reach us for any questions, concerns. And I know there was a question or two about our website. On that website, you can find the annual school concurrency report, 5-year capital plan, impact fee study, student enrollment information. There's also a map where anybody in the city should want to know, oh, where's my student zone to go to school if I'm living here? They can plug their address in and see, oh, it's this elementary, middle, and high school. So that's a really helpful little feature.
And just to point that out, so we have Mineola Horizon Academy as a K-8 that will open this coming school year, so in August. And so we did have an attendance boundary shift that took place. It was approved by the board last September, is that right? Yes, last September. It will go into effect in August. And so we actually have both maps this year's, in case somebody just moves into town, but also next year's attendance boundary maps as well.
So with the Mineola K-8 opening up next year, would that relieve some of them over in Arroyo Academy?
So we
Take some
actually
of the
have
pressure
two
off?
schools, well, we don't, but there are two schools that are opening next year. So Mineola Horizon Academy is on the east side of Aurelian Cole, and the New Groveland Cherry Lake Preparatory School, which is a charter school, is actually right on the west side of Aurelian Cole's
Right.
boundary. And so between the two of those, we do expect there to be some relief. I will also say Aurelian Cole's a very popular school,
Well.
and they have great programs. So we'll see what that effect is. We're going to kind of monitor that for a while. I don't think any of us want to do an attendance boundary shift, so that would probably be about as much as we could do. But we're going to monitor the effect of those two schools.
The
We do
Mineola
expect
School is Lake County School Board, or it's a charter?
It's Lake County Schools.
Lake County.
It's actually the same prototype design as Aurelian
Aurelian
Cole
Cole.
and Lake Point Academy. And if you drive up Hancock past Lake Mineola High School and look on the right-hand side, you'll see us down there.
That's going by the hills of Mineola.
Yes.
That's that
It is
one.
in the hills of Mineola, yes.
That's gonna be a great, it's a great spot.
Yeah,
gonna be
it's gonna be a gorgeous school.
Yeah.
We're very proud of it.
So this is where I sort of get sideways. This is where I get sideways with the whole process, is this whole proportionate share mitigation is nothing more, for me, it's nothing more than a shell game, because all they're doing is paying money and getting credits back on impact fees. So yes, they're aiming it at a thing, but this isn't slowing development. There's nothing there. There's no teeth in it. There's nothing that's going to sort of limit what we have to do. So that's when we brought it up, and I said, well, what happens if we deny it? Well, if you deny it, you're going to be compelled to approve it. So we saw the slide that says, oh, well, we can deny it. Well, we can deny it, and then you're going to turn around and you're going to approve it. So I don't know what that process is to get that so that there is a certain amount of a rule, a certain amount of a way to say, we want to protect our kids, we want to protect our schools. The number one piece of the pie for our high housing costs, which means our ad valorem, That piece is schools. And with poor schools, it affects our housing prices, it affects all of that, it affects our entire economy. So for me, it's important to make sure that we're supporting our schools and that our students and parents feel that they're getting the best education possible and that we're able to support them. And I felt through this process, we were not able to support them. I felt like we were hamstrung, and so that's part of the reason that they're here, because we couldn't say no.
Yeah.
And I don't appreciate that part of it. So hopefully Christian can come back and say, oh, we can redo our interlocal agreement, or whatever that case may be, or we as a council need to look into at least, because we know it's at the 5-year, at least a moratorium on multifamily for a period of time, whatever that is. And I don't know some answers to that. I know we can do it 6 months at a time. I don't know if we could do it 6 months, 6 months, 6 months. That puts us in the 3-year mark, so that then we know that that is on the plans and it's going to be done. But if we continue with what we're doing, stuff off the hooks, the stuff over here, you know, we're talking about building some very substantial multifamily developments. All we're doing is we're hurting ourselves, and we've got to find an answer to that.
Please clarify for me, because I just don't understand, is when you say it's a shell game with no teeth, what do you mean?
So that mitigation, they're getting, it's just credits.
So Lumberyard paid almost $900,000.
And then they got credits.
What does that mean, they got well, they're supposed to.
They
Oh,
paid
yeah.
They're not paying
900,000.
any more money,
But
they're
what-
getting that
what do you mean
credited back.
credits?
I'm
So
sorry?
What
What's the credit
happens
mean?
is, and he's correct to a point, what happens is that.
I would caution the shell game.
Shell game,
Well,
yes.
yeah,
It's
without
not
the
a
shell
shell
game
game.
part.
It's not a shell
I've
game.
learned to work with that.
Yes. But he is correct that what happens is we get an earlier payment with that mitigation.
Mhm.
That's all it is, and that's a credit back to their school impact fee. Whereas if they didn't have the proportionate share mitigation, they would be paying that impact fee at building permit, one by
So-
unit.
So one of the things about schools, right, is that it's a very, I call it a lumpy expenditure, right? So our board does not, has a pay-as-you-go
Philosophy.
policy, that basically says that we will not go into debt in order to build schools.
On speculation.
If we can.
Right.
As long as we can, we will not go into debt to do that. So, so basically that means we have to have all the cash in hand in order to build that school before we approve the GMP for the school. So, in the case of like Mineola Horizon Academy, that's a $60 million school. And so we had to have $60 million available. In the case of the Wellness Way High School, we are anticipating it to be around $200 million. That means we have to have $200 million in order to be able to build that school. And $200 million in our bank accounts. And so what proportionate share mitigation does for us, from the school board's perspective, and we are not here to approve or disapprove or stand in the way of development, or to stand in the way of you making a choice not to have development, right? That is not, the school board is reacting to the development that is coming. And so proportionate share mitigation, that $900,000 or almost $1 million that Lumberyard is paying, they pay it now, right? Instead of in increments of, I don't know,
$5,000, $10,000.
let's just say
yeah.
$30,000,
Yeah.
no, how much is our impact fee? $10,000, let's just say.
Yes.
Helen can tell you the exact numbers.
$10,174.
There you go, $10,000.
Or give me the pennies, I'll be even more impressed.
$10,000
No
as they pull a building permit. And so what that does is that gives us that proportion of that $200 million that we need upfront. It just gets us the ability to build that capacity so that it is available when that impact hits.
And that's $100,000 per student. That's the, more or less the calculation. 200 million, 2,000 students, I think I saw that in another proportionate share agreement.
I'm thinking-
It's more or less, and I get that.
You know, and unfortunately, it's, yeah, it's, I will say the building environment now, I always use the examples of the three K-8s that we have built over the last couple of years, right? So Lake Minneola High, or Lake Point Academy, these are all three the same prototype. Lake Point Academy was approved by the board in like 2019. It cost us about $35 million to build it. Aurelia Cole Academy, slightly different, but still pretty similar, cost us over $50 million to build. And that included the auditorium, and I think it was about $55 million. Lake Point is now at about, Horizon, Mineola Horizon is now, it was KAFF for years, so it's like, I have trouble remembering the name. Mineola Horizon is now over $65 million. So costs for us have doubled
Yeah.
in the 5 years since 2019. So, you know, it is, it's difficult for us to keep up, right? And that's when I say, the board has a pay-as-you-go policy, and that's their philosophy. Hopefully, we will be able to keep that up, because it's a difficult environment for us to work in.
But just going back, the reason for that was that at the time I was there, we were $500 million in debt, and we were spending about 17 million a year just in interest.
I completely understand
And
that, you know.
at that time, we couldn't, you know, we could have been building an elementary school a year, so costs have gone up. And I get that sometimes you do need to take debt, but that was, they were climbing out of a hole that was not the board's doing. It was just time, impact, recession, and it really put them in a very bad position. So, I mean, I don't want to fault the school. It was, just so everybody has a history on how it got there. It was a different time. They built a lot of schools. There was a lot of growth going on from 2002 to 2007. They borrowed a tremendous amount of money. When that 2007 hit and it was upside down, we had to cut $80 million out of the budget, and it hurt. So,
Yeah, when I first started, our capital plan was over $800 million. And there was a triple hit of the recession. The state legislature changed our capital funding formula and dropped us from 2 mil to 1.5 mil of the ad valorem. And then Save Our Homes went into effect at exactly the same time. And so we went down to, I think, a capital plan of about 250 million. And meanwhile, the board had borrowed, you know, $400 million because there was this incredible growth and they needed to keep up with it. And so, so yeah, so it's, you know, I always tell people, it's like planning, as much as we try to be great planners, sometimes you just have to accept that you made the decision for the right reasons at the right time, and if it turned out to be the wrong decision, or things change and somebody's questioning it at the end, then, you know, you made the decision for the reason that you did.
so, but for me, the hard part, specifically with the lumberyard, is that we know they're going to be done with those homes before this school gets built. And that's where I have my issue, is that, so when I say a shell game, that wasn't against what you guys are doing. They're paying that up front. Those homes will be done. They'll have already taken their money back on that impact fee, and those students will already be overfilled into our city. And so that's, for that particular one, all they did was just pay it up front, and they'll pull it out. So they were just moving money from one point in time to another point in time, hence my.
This is going on with all developments, no, not just that one. You know, it happened with all our developments, and I don't think this was all done for us to sit here and deny developments and everything. Basically, it comes to us just to say, hey, it's been done, the agreement has been worked out between the school and the developer. And that's basically all it is, and it's a state requirement, if I'm not mistaken. So, not for us to say, hey, you can't develop this. All right. I understand the fact that we need to try to look out for our kids, and no one knows I know all our schools is overcrowded. I still don't understand why we can't build schools to exceed today's population when we know we got thousands of kids coming on tomorrow. But again, that goes back to the state. I know, for example, like as I said before, Reed Cole Academy, I think it was built for about 1,200. It opened with about 1,400 students, you know. So these are the things that's happening in every subdivision. We sit here and look at Wilderness Way. We do not have any schools in the Wilderness Way area. But look at all the homeless coming up. Every one of them had to go through this concurrency and everything as well. So it's not just the lumberyard, but it's every subdivision that we deal with. And basically it comes to us, and I think, I'm not mistaken, Mr. Well, you can correct me, but it basically comes to us to just say, hey, we've seen it, they've got the agreement, they can move forward with their planning.
But this is where I disagree, because Pulte was not in mitigation. Lumberyard is. So we're having a specific conversation about mitigation.
Mm-hmm.
Are we able to change our interlocal agreement to where if we say no, it's an actual no? Or are we forced by the state to just say yes?
I think the interlocal could take a different shape if the parties agree and we negotiate it. But the mechanism by which, the consequence of saying no, I don't know what that would look like off the top of my head. I mean, so it could be renegotiated.
So, I'm sorry though, and forgive a little bit of ignorance because I was not necessarily involved in the lumberyard discussion, but I don't think that the proportionate share mitigation agreement was necessarily the right vehicle to say, no, we don't want this development.
Right.
Right? I mean, basically, you were at a point, it wasn't necessarily saying no to the proportionate share mitigation agreement, it was that you were at a point where you had already approved this development, and the proportionate share mitigation agreement was just kind of a final step.
Right.
It
So-
came after the fact, yes.
Yeah.
It
and
came
so-
after the fact, but we still weren't able
Right.
to, if we
So-
continue down this path and we don't at some point put a stop to it, we're bringing in more and more students.
But as a planner, I think there are other mechanisms for you to say no to development, not.
And that's, as I said, I don't think this
If it never comes
concurrency
to us,
is
it never
designed
comes
for
to
that.
us, right?
So one of the challenges I think that we'll continue to see is old approvals. And this council, for example, has already put timelines on construction so that we can avoid those situations. But when we see a project that was approved 4, 5, 6, 10 years ago, and it has the rights, that's where, when we sit in our seats, it's like, what tools do we have at that point, because approvals have been given? And I think, don't let me speak for you, I know you're more than capable of speaking for yourself, but I think that's where Mr. Howard is coming from, is, hey, we're trying to kind of maybe fix some things that, not even that they were wrong at the time that they were decided, but now things have changed after COVID and construction and half a decade or a whole decade. And it almost has a sense of powerlessness for those of us sitting up there. And I think I shared the same feelings I'm hearing Mr. Howard express, which are, why am I being asked for my opinion if my opinion doesn't matter? If I have to say yes, then this is not, and there's no mutual agreement here because I don't agree. Why don't I agree? It's not about you, it's about where's the school that these kids are gonna go. And I hear you saying very eloquently, I'm taking notes on how I can do it better myself in the future, hey, maybe you guys shouldn't have approved it in the first place, and you're not wrong. It's just, that's where we are. And so how do we handle that? And moving forward, how can we work with developers who do want to do projects? And I hear you saying you got to get the right property, and I hear we've got to get credits to them, and I'm sometimes stubborn. I know. I don't think it's improbable at all for us to say to a developer, hey, we like what you want to do, but you're looking to put 300 homes, and I need a space on the corner for a school, and I need a space, or whatever corner you want, and we're going to ask your neighbor for the same thing because they're also doing 300 homes. So that's 600 homes, and we want these kids to be able to walk to school. And at least in my experience with developers, they're like, cool, as long as they know that up front. So when we look and say, hey, every 7,000 homes, we need an elementary school, we're working on our comp plan. Well, where are the 7,000 homes? Where's the elementary school? Is that a relationship that's part of that December meeting? Like, how do we do that? Because I think we have more power than we're yielding, and I hate the word power with government. But I think we have more influence maybe than what we're yielding from this
And I
house.
think actually, I mean, that is one of the things, we have an elementary school site in Wellness Way because of the influence that the city wielded on that developer. And so, unfortunately, I think with the high school, there's very limited amount of land left in Wellness Way that is within the city's boundary and purview. And we have passed on a site because it was not a good site for us in the end. And so, now we are asking the county to kind of wield that same influence in their portion of Wellness Way as we go.
And just so you know, that part of what this problem runs into is that the county approves things for us, and then we get handed them. So this is just another tool in our box. So, we've got things coming up right now that the county has already approved. They're going to hand them to us, and we know for a fact that you guys are not, they're going to end up in mitigation, and we're stuck with it. And that's not an okay position to, in my opinion, it's not an okay position to put the city in. And I would just like the tools in our toolbox that we can do. And I don't know what we can do, but that was why I brought this here, was what do we as a city council have? What do we need to renegotiate? I mean, I know we need to work on JPAs, I know we need to work on this, but we should have every tool in our box to be able to say we're going to do what's right by our citizens, by the taxpayers. And if it's not right, and if it's not right for the students, I mean, we should all be able to look at that and say, this isn't okay. And I'm not going to bend to developers' will. I'm just not going to do that. And I don't know why we would even have that conversation.
Well, what are the options to the experts in the room? What tools do you think we have that we might not be using?
So, I mean, we can discuss the interlocal agreement and see, but I will say it is there's 14 parties to the interlocal agreement. So there is a process built into that agreement for bringing proposed changes to it. It's never been exercised, so I don't know the specific details, but I do know that, there's a certain timeline for proposing changes,
Yes.
And then it goes to the committee, and then basically that becomes part of the December meeting. There's follow-up meetings if they, feel like it, and then it actually has to go back out to every one of those jurisdictions, and then every, jurisdiction has to buy back into those changes. And so, if that's something that you have specific recommendations or specific changes, then there is a process for going through that.
I think it's a 60-day notice of the intent to amend.
And basically we would, work to distribute that, work to bring those meetings together, and, but, the more specific the better. And then that way everybody kind of has a chance to say, okay, what does that mean for our jurisdiction?
Thank you. Well, I've been in contact with some of our peers in Mineola and Groveland about doing a kind of regional approach to certain things. Some of them have come to me, some of them have come to them. We've talked recreation and water and traffic. I mean, there's kind of I can tell you, there's a general feeling. None of this has been workshopped, I'm just talking one person to another person in these conversations, but there's a general sense of unity here, I think, in South Lake, and I think we have the support of our surrounding cities, and perhaps it would help us to communicate with them to say, hey, what do we want as kind of a South Lake community? Because I empathize for the school board's responsibility to 14 cities and the county representatives, and I think really they're doing the best they can to provide a public school experience to every citizen of Lake County. We sit here and it's easy for us to worry about just Clermont, and I think that if we come to the school board with an interlocal agreement conversation that includes the surrounding cities, if we all can come to an agreement, I can't imagine there would be a huge argument if the folks involved and all impacted are all in agreement. So I would suggest we maybe approach some of, Mineola and Groveland and say, how are they feeling? Are they feeling like this concurrency agreement's working for them? It could just be a problem we have, and if it's just a problem we have, then it's really not for the other 13 cities to worry about, if it's just a problem in Clermont.
It's quite possible that the others haven't had to deal with the mitigation. I mean, you might
Yeah.
have, this is the first time I've had to deal with it from this side. So, with all the changeover in councils, Mineola may have never have they? So, individual
got some big
council,
projects.
individual council, not as a city, but individual council members.
Yeah.
So individual council members may have a different view of it, as I do. So, I think it's worth having the conversation. But coming
Am I
back-
on track? Like if South Lake kind of says, hey, all of these CSAs would like to see something different, whatever that something different is, whether it's the school. I know for me, I would say I'd like to see the school where the concurrency is paid to be within, I'd like to say 2 miles, but that's a pipe dream.
I gotta say, I
Let's
think
start
the
with
school
10.
board would probably have an issue with that.
5, can we, but if we came and said, hey, there's some standards we'd like to see, I think if a whole region was coming to you, it would be easier than if you're feeling, if it's just us. I think if it's just us, we're a very small minority. I don't mean to correct you, and I'm only being technical because I think there might be 16 parties to the agreement with the county, all the cities, and the school board
And the
itself,
school.
right? So we're one of 16. So I think, one, we need to figure out what we want as a city. What are our standards for our residents and citizens? And then how does that potentially impact or interact with what the school board is doing? And is there something we can do here that we can influence here that doesn't cause them to have to change their whole system? This is pretty well organized. They have answers to all the questions. They have a system in place that's been very thought out and clearly has a lot of numbers behind it. But if we feel like it's not working, maybe there's something we can do in Clermont to help create more opportunities for Clermont residents. Which might be outside of the school board, but I think that's probably okay.
Again, I said we're trying to look for the school board to try to deny projects, and I don't think that's their responsibility. It's up to us, and besides, this will not trigger a concurrency if we do not approve the project to begin with.
I agree with you.
Okay, now, when they come to us with a project, do we have the right to approve it? Do they meet all the requirements, whatever, for approval? That's what we have to stop and think, long look at when they come to us to begin with.
They're not
Because
coming to us.
until it's approved, the concurrence agreement isn't triggered until we approve the project.
We're not necessarily approving the project.
What do you mean?
Look at Mr. Boyd's property. We didn't approve that.
Which one?
McKenna property. We didn't approve that.
No, that's the
Why not?
county.
That's the county, and you're getting ready to inherit it.
Right.
But
And-
you're gonna inherit that.
Well, we gonna end up inheriting it and everything, but right now, everything is under the county, and we
So
have.
how do we handle that?
Huh?
How do we handle that?
JPA.
And that's one of the things one of the things we were starting to get a pretty good grip on, I thought, and because that one of the things we really were working on is the fact that the county was approving a lot of things outside the city boundaries, but then we were starting to ask them, hey, before you approve anything, send it to the city, which they were at one point. It was actually coming to us and asking us our opinion, and if we went back and said yea or nay on it, they wouldn't go no further. We had a pretty good working relationship there. Somehow, and somewhere, it went haywire, and they just started approving everything again. And the reason this happened is a lot of times, some projects come to us, and we would say no to them because they don't meet certain requirements that we're asking them for. But they know they still have they can go back to the county, and they'll go back to the county, and the county will go ahead and pick it up at that point when we say no. Okay. I think McKinnon asked for some services from us, and we actually given it to them now, right? And to be known, I think I've told Mr. Van Wagner on this, as far as I'm concerned, if we provide service for it, I want to annex it into the city. Okay? And this is happening quite a bit. Anything that this county have approved and we provide the services, it need to be in the city. We need to
I
collect
share
the
your
dollars for it.
And I don't
okay?
think you have any disagreement.
Huh?
Yeah.
And you don't have any disagreement on
Uh,
that.
Of course, it's another project, a couple other projects that we turned down out there. They went to the county and got them, and I'm finding out, I think you were supposed to come back and let me know if we've, the one out here, off of, Hammond Ridge Road. The rental properties out there, it's in the county. We, yeah, that's another one and we actually originally turned that down to begin with too, see.
So what are you hearing with the, as the school board? I mean, this has kind of become our show, and I get that. But what are you hearing? Because you sit in a completely different
Yeah.
seat, and I completely agree with what the mayor is saying. And these are the challenges that we have with the county approving these projects. And I'm questioning if we have the ability as the city to say, we're not gonna provide utilities unless these criteria are met, including we need to approve the concurrency impact, that initial report that you get done at the application stage. You know, I mean, what can we do? Because they're absolutely right. A lot of these
Well,
projects aren't coming to us.
We've actually told some projects, we will not provide you service, okay? But then what can happen then, they can come in and they can do their own service. I think one of the things I hear on the Hammond Ridge Road is, I don't think we provide full service out there, what is just sewer? Sunshine is also, because you got Sunshine, so they provide some that we would provide. So Sunshine providing some, and then we providing some.
So just to be respectful of the
but-
districts, do we still need them here? Does anybody have questions?
Well,
I-
no, but see,
Not for you
I'm
guys, I just want to let you guys to
insight.
sit here and listen to us discuss.
I'm just saying, we trying to use this concurrency to look at ways to say no, and I don't think this is the avenue we need to be going, because basically, we just fill in the square when they come to us, because somewhere along the way, everything was approved for the project, and it triggered the concurrency, and we just said, okay, we've seen it, you've got the agreement, now you can move on with your project, okay? So we have to stop the project from being approved again.
So, but Mr. Mayor, when you approved the lumberyard district, did you know that they weren't going to be able to, that the schools weren't going to be able to meet that
Yeah,
project?
well, any project.
Did you know that when you approved it?
Yes, I know that it's just like any other project that get approved, the school's not gonna meet it because every one of our schools is already over capacity. So any project we
So
approve.
2
in this
years
city-
ago, you knew they weren't going to be able to approve it?
Yeah, well, every school in our county, in the city, throughout the county is over capacity. Well, not even throughout the county, but here in our area is over capacity. We do not have the school, East Ridge is over capacity, Lake Mignogna is over capacity. I've said,
Not the middle school.
not the middle schools, no.
There's plenty of capacity
See,
in the middle school.
but the high school, see, we've been, most of the high schools where we're suffering. And that's been a big fight for years, trying to build another high school, because we got all the students from down in the Four Corners that we having to provide service for, and they're being bused all the way from Four Corners to East Ridge High School.
Is that true?
Yes. See,
East Ridge is our furthest.
that's
high
why,
school.
that's
Nearest
why,
high school.
yeah. To me, that's why the most important school for me right now is the high school in Wellness Way, to give East Ridge some relief and keep from having to bus the kids in the Four Corners so far.
So the middle schools used to go to Windy Hill, it was 45 minutes each way.
To some extent, some middle schoolers still go to Windy Hill.
Do they? Yeah.
Yeah, well,
Lake
yeah,
Point, has about 400
But-
students, and then,
But in the meantime, you still got, like I'm saying, in the meantime, you still got all these other projects that's coming up, apartments being built. You got the live local agreement, which I keep talking about. People can come in and store a building. We have no say-so over that. So how many kids would that bring in that we have no say-so of? See, that's where, they, of course, they have to go to the school to get concurrency for all of that again. And we have no say-so. The whole thing is to stop the projects before they get here and trigger the concurrency, okay? So,
Kelly and Helen, are there any policies at the school board level that restrict the amount of time a student might have to spend on a bus to get to school?
there are, I think it's 45 minutes.
And that's a school board policy.
It is not a school board, I think
It's
it's
just-
actually state.
Yeah.
I think it's a state.
they can, 45 minutes, you say?
I believe, and, don't quote me on that, don't go out and say.
No,
it,
no,
but
no,
I
it's-
will,
no, we're
double
friendly
check it
here.
and
We're
send it
friendly here.
back. But I believe that is the time limit.
From
And
what
it's
you're
not really a
hearing,
limit, it's a guideline.
Right.
you're the expert, I am not. From what you're hearing, what tools or advice can you give us to help make, we want to reduce traffic in Clermont, and we would like our students to have, and our families, to have a pleasurable experience going to school. What advice can you give us, given what you've heard here today?
It's a really layered
Yeah,
and probably more than I can handle at 4:44 in the afternoon. You know, I probably would have to think about that. And that's a, you know, unfortunately, I think to some extent, my experience is very much my viewpoint in a lot of ways, and for a question like that is limited by what I know that we can do, right?
Sure.
And
Thank you
so,
for your honesty. That's helpful.
I get blinkers or blinders on
Yeah.
because I know what our funding limitations are. You know, I think all of the educators, I think everybody would agree that, you know, we would like to go back to a world where we can all, you know, all of our kids can walk to the school and it's small and everybody knows who everybody is. Unfortunately, that is not the reality of educational funding in the state of Florida.
not the reality of the hedge fund. The other problem with that is the fact that no parents want their kids riding buses these days. So every parent
So they
wants to
drive
drive their kids. So if some kind of way we can force parents into making the kids either walk or take buses, we eliminate a lot of that.
If you were the,
Okay.
if you.
Let me remind you how that went for me. It did not go well.
Yeah, I know it did. It didn't, but, I mean, but we can't do that, see? But some reason, parents don't have the trust in bus systems, and of course, like you say, we don't have our kids walking. I think for Reed Cole Academy, we went there and changed the policy. Instead of a 2-mile radius, we went back to 1 mile for
So that's
Pacific and for
actually-
Reed
so all
Cole.
of our elementary schools, we will bus outside of 1 mile.
Okay.
Which is the state is 2 miles.
2 miles, right?
And we actually, the district has made a choice.
Yes.
They will fund that bus between 1 and 2 miles. At the elementary school level, when we went to K-8, we also realized you're having, you know, all of those students are riding the same bus. So basically, we extended that to K-8s as well. And so for the K-8s and for elementary schools, we bus outside of 1 mile at the districts.
And that was to help try to eliminate some of the traffic in the cars.
So we did that, and specifically to Clermont, the problem is Highway 50, and that's how, at that time, Chief Broadway and the council approved having the crossing guard at East Avenue. I believe there used to be one at Bloxham. So there was a reason that they couldn't do the busing, but it was hugely unpopular and very much led to me being unelected in a very big hurry. So it was, you know, parents just were not going to have that. They have their entitlement and they're going to keep it. So it was, doing that is not, you know, look, can we figure something out? We've talked about, you know, crosswalk, whatever the case may be. Can we encourage it? Sure, but at the end of the day, they're not going to. I mean, I'm lucky my child rides the bus to Aurelia Cole. How long will he do that? I don't know. I mean, hopefully for the rest of the middle school. But when he was at Cypress, I mean, we had to take him. And, you know, so it's not something that they can fix. But like I said, I don't want to hold them up here if we're going to have a discussion amongst ourselves about.
I appreciate
so.
you ladies taking the time. I found it to be extremely informative, and I thank you for your partnership with the city and our residents.
It's always good to have a conversation.
Yeah.
And kind of see, you know, where everybody is at. And if you do come to us with proposed changes, we'll have a better understanding of why. But before we do go, I wanted to make sure you had a couple of things that were not necessarily my department, so I want to make sure I get the right people to you.
Okay.
And you had something about homeschoolers, so I can have the homeschool department reach out to you. And then graduation locations, I think those are set by the schools.
I can answer that.
find some
I'll
more
answer that for her.
information. Okay. And then, I think that was it that I had. So
Thank you so
I'll
much.
have them reach out to you, okay?
Appreciate you.
Well, again, thank you all for coming, taking time out to schedule to come down and share this information and share it with me. Kelly, I didn't realize the high school negotiation was off. I didn't know that.
Well, if anybody knows of any other sites, I mean, we have been working with the county to try and might find that. We do theoretically, hoping that the economy stays in good shape, we do have the funding in the 5th year of our 5-year plan, and so, we're
For the high
ready
school.
for the high school, and so we're ready to. But yes, we always appreciate Clermont's partnership with us. You guys really have been great partners through the years, and we really appreciate working with John and Bert. They've been very good partners.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Call me if you have questions.
Mine, oh mine.
So, just for Allison on the graduation. So, so on the graduation, that's an individual school choice, and it's typically done by the students. And so East Ridge for a long time had been doing it at UCF, and that was because they have to pay for that. They actually have to rent that building. It's quite expensive. But with the Jumbotron, have you been to a graduation there?
I graduated there.
So, the first time I did, I shook almost 800 hands in a day. I mean, I was like, wow, that's a lot of students. So, but to move the students through quickly, efficiently, it gives them a great video, that whole process. So on a per student basis, I guess ends up being reasonable, but it is quite expensive to do it. I was like, wow, okay. South Lake typically did it in their football field. But I think they've started to change that, and that was driven by students. And I know that Lake Mineola High School started in their ball field, and I think they have switched over to UCF as well. But that is going to be in most cases, that's going to be a student
Like student government
council,
thing?
yeah, driven, where do we want to go with their, with their committees and all of that. So they choose that, they choose to spend the money, they choose the direction that goes. It's certainly not a district choice. As I said, it's quite expensive, and it's a lot to get all of that done. But at the end of the day, you end up with a great video and what I believe is a fantastic process to get them through. For what it's worth.
I don't know. I don't necessarily like having to go all the way out to UCF and see our kids graduate, but in reality, look at the circumstances. I think it's a better deal. Of course, it's expensive. I know even when I had to go out there with my kids graduating, I didn't like having to drive way out there. They from Clermont, while we can't graduate here. Typical, like when I graduated from high school here, we did it on the football field. Of course,
Right.
nowadays, of course, we only had 100 kids. We only had 500 kids in the whole school. Now we got high school kids. It's almost 1,000 kids in a high school graduating classes. So we're even trying to do it on the football field, or try to put all them kids on the football field in the heat, and the parents and everything still don't have the capacity in our stadiums to hold that many people.
Yeah, for the large classes.
Yeah.
I was thinking of our Performing Arts Center
Yeah.
and potential, I know we use it for Lake Sumter State. Obviously not the big schools, but some of the smaller schools might be options for us to help
Well,
bring people to the
Even with the
center and
Performing
bring
Arts Center,
awareness.
we just graduated Lake Sumter last year with the biggest class there, and I understand they got the one now. Another class coming up going to be bigger, and it was only 600 and something students last year when I went to graduation out there,
Yeah.
and it was, I mean, the place was packed, and it was limited to who can attend as well, parents and everything. So.
Well, and for those of you who are connected to the schools, I did speak to Gigi Lemon at the Big House, and she's got 6 basketball courts, so she can set that up for whatever size they need. And anytime I can keep business and local, that's always what I'll always do that if I can. So I thought, why are we going to UCF
Yeah,
if we can do it here locally? But
Well, I go out there just about every year for graduation from kids graduating. I have to drive out there each year, once or twice a year, to a graduation, and I don't like it, but I'm getting used to it now. But the good thing about it, when I get there and finally get inside, because even out there, they're somewhat limited on how many tickets a kids can have. And when I get inside, at least it's comfortable. I'm not in the heat and everything. And they seem to be very well organized out there because they used to do it. So,
Well, how do you
So-
feel about the meat and potatoes of today?
So I think that for us, we just need to give Christian and Rick some direction. For me, I really would like to know if we're able to do a moratorium. I'm very concerned about our school situation. We now know that it's 5 years out. So, if we pick a number and said it's, multifamily above 25, we're not going to approve. I mean, I think that's a good starting number. I don't know where everybody else is, but
How does that work
Um,
with Live Local?
the locals on their own, they're gonna be able to move it through. I don't know if we changed our interlocal agreement where they got pinned down by school board on the mitigation side, if they'd still be able to move through, or if the state would override us. But at the end of the day, we've got one Live Local, and we need to work through our legislators to get that fixed. It's still a horrible deal. It's ongoing, to be a horrible deal, and we really don't have any things around it. But the other pieces and parts, we do. And we've got some, some developments that are troublesome, and that we really need to say, hey, let's stop some of this growth, because all we're gonna do is compound the Live Local issue by approving more and more. At least with a residential, when we go out to McKenna, at least with that, it's 600 homes, and it's gonna take a long time to work through that. Look how fast this one on Hooks has gone up. And do you know how many is in that Hook? Well, how many are in that Hooks?
It's 300. Is it 280, 300 in Hook Street, Kirk?
Yeah,
300.
I mean, look how fast that's gone up. And that's,
Yeah.
every
Less than a
time we
year.
approve one of those, it's that quick.
Yeah,
And-
but then, like I say, we Live Local, I know nothing has come before us, but I do know it's one, 2 or 3 of them out there Live Local, that we've been kind of like fighting for the last year or two.
They're coming.
And I appreciate that, but like I said, Hooks is an example.
Yeah.
This one's another example of 400. And as we start compounding this, and we start not putting the pieces in place for us to do something about it, we're not only compounding our problem, we're compounding a school problem. And at some point, we are really, in my opinion, we are breaking the trust that our residents put in us as far as the development goes. And I think we're getting very close to that, where we're at, just from what I hear from folks with other kids, and hey, our schools are overcrowded, how long are you gonna continue to do this, when are you gonna stop? And if we don't put the pieces in place for us to do that, and to be responsible to the voters who put us in here, then I think for me personally, it bothers me, and so I'd like to find a way to just be more responsible to them. I mean, I'm not anti-development. I know that it comes off that way. I'm not anti-development. I like developers. I like commercial developers. I just don't like a lot of multi-family housing overrunning our school system, and that's, to me, is the lowest hanging fruit, to say, you know what, let's stop this
You're talking about moratorium.
moratorium.
Well, we,
Over-
Well, but we need the letter to the state that Christian's working on to state that as well, that specifically because Live Local is gonna tie our hands. Even if we do a
So even
moratorium,
if we put a moratorium on, that would override it.
we would
We
can't
get
stop them all.
developers.
we can.
But we
and-
can
Pushing.
stop
And
some of
even
them.
Even Hook Street, we denied that. I actually sat on the council, was on the council, we denied it the first time around. And of course, come to find out, they were given a lot of privileges from the previous council that I didn't know about. And of course, when it came back the second time, it's another project sitting out there. And I need you all to sit down and think, and I'm hoping they forget about it. I keep trying not to talk about it because I'm hoping it just go away. It's right there in front of East Ridge High School, East Ridge Middle School. It was approval for some apartments right there on that corner, and I sat there and approved it. We denied that twice before they took us to court, and after the third time, we said, oh, we may well go ahead and give it to them, else we gonna find ourselves in a lawsuit. But yeah, we denied it twice. And that's, how long that's been now, Kirk? 2 years? I think I asked you about it a few weeks ago if they time had expired, but I think they got a special extension and everything. But so that one's sitting out there, okay? It's a lot of projects that's sitting out there, and like I say, I know I sat on the council and denied that one twice before it came back the third time, and we said, it's been to the magistrate twice, we better avoid the third one and everything before we find ourselves in court, and we gave it to them. And of course, the third time they came back, they made a lot of different changes, and I like the final plan a lot better than the original, but it's still, what, 200 and, I think it's 260 apartments, I think it called for, right in front of our middle school.
So I don't know what you can bring back to us, and I don't know what everybody else wants, but certainly I think we ought to know every tool that we have, and then decide on how
I can tell you, I
drastic we
think
wanna
there's a
go.
lot of options, but I think it's gonna, a lot of policy options for
Right.
your consideration. I don't know that you could achieve what you're talking about with just one thing.
Mhm.
In other words, I do think that you as a policy option probably can consider a moratorium,
We could do a moratorium
a
on
temporary moratorium.
Temporary.
like 50 units or less.
Well,
or more.
I analogize, and I know you have hard stop, but I analogize it to the medical marijuana dispensary thing. A lot of cities, I don't know if Clermont did, but adopted temporary moratoriums for 6 months at a time and extended them. And it was never tested how far can you extend them, but in reality, probably reasonable is 2 or 3 years, something like that. I don't know, but the point is that's probably an option. However, that's gonna have to be tied to you actually taking some steps to address the reason for the moratorium, if that makes sense.
And that comes
Yes.
back to
Zoning,
the
comp plan,
schools and all of that stuff,
revising
yeah,
the
yeah,
agreement.
Right.
Yes, sir.
One other thing, Mr. Mayor was right about multiple projects coming. So even if you do that,
Those
my
already in
concern
it.
is the county is doing some stuff in the city. It's happening right now.
Right, well, I mean, that comes back to the JPA, and you just got to lean on, because before Brian left, supposedly they were ready to have discussions with us on the JPA, so please get a hold of Sean and lean on him. I mean, if I need to call Leslie, I'll call Leslie
I
again.
meet with him on Monday.
If I'm not mistaken, we're supposed to be starting to have meetings again on the JPA.
I'd love to get a copy
What we
of
was
that.
doing at one point, we was having, I think, every 2-3 months or so, all the cities and managers and everything coming together trying to draft JPAs and everything. So I thought I read something where we
We're
wanted.
supposed to be going to a meeting
Is-
soon.
It's soon, okay, yeah,
Yeah,
so
okay.
get back. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, council
planning
members are
agreement.
welcome to join, go to those meetings as well when they start them back. I know that you were before.
There's one, the mayor and the city manager.
Well, that's but with the JPA's, meeting we used to have, it was open to all other council members, and they said it wouldn't violate sunshine law, even though we was all there because we weren't specifically talking about something yet in the city, so. But thank you. But yeah, I don't think we can try to tie the school board hands and everything, because they're not here to try to approve developments. They're trying to run a school, just like I always said to Mr. Purvis, I'm not here to try to run the schools.
But we're
That's
not
our
tying
job,
their
so,
hands.
No.
We're not tying their hands.
Well,
We're saying no on our side. What they're telling us right now is that we have an interlocal agreement where we can't say no. But there's something called home rule, and we've given away home rule. I mean,
well,
for
we
me,
didn't-
that's
we
not
didn't give it
okay.
away. We didn't give it away.
Well,
It's being
we
taken
si-
away from us by the state.
If we signed on to an interlocal agreement, we gave our own home rule
Isn't that
away.
something?
And that's, I'd just like to have that.
We are required to enter into an agreement.
Right.
Like, we don't have any option about entering into
Right.
what it says is certainly.
Yeah,
in our
I mean,
agreement.
it's, why would we give our abilities away? I mean, we are the largest city in this county, at
We're
least
the
right
largest,
now.
we're the largest city in the county.
And, at some point, we should act like it and flex our authority. I mean,
And I totally agree, and that's why I've been so adamant about we're the largest city in the county, yet we have less representation in the south end of this county than anywhere in the county. But yet still, we the biggest city in the county. So let's,
well, you should run against Sean.
I'm not looking to run it for county commissioner and everything, but, I just feel like, one of the things I've been fighting for is more service and more representation in the south end and down here, because we are the largest city in the county, and actually the population of the county half the county population is down here in the south end.
I will tell you, Mr. Parks is meeting with me once a month now since December. He's making an effort So,
Well, I used to have Mr. Park come into my council meeting when I got every, up until last year, just for election, during election season, somehow he stopped, but every council, once a month, he came into my council. I had him coming in and giving us update, and we could ask these questions and try to steer him down the road, like on road projects and lights and all these things. But during the elections cycle last year, things got so wild, and he hasn't been back since. I don't think I've seen him in the council since October, August, or September or something. So, but that's one of the reasons, and that's like I say, we had a good. I thought we had a good relationship with the county and everything with what we established with him coming in. And we were working, you know, we were getting things done, and all at once somehow it just went. It went. I don't know what happened. Okay, it's nowhere like it used to be. Okay. And like I say, I'm glad to hear you and Mr. Parks are starting to meet on a regular basis again and everything. At least coming in, talking with you and everything, keeping them things going. So that's a good thing. But we still have to get hold to the county. As I say, they steady approving things in the county, and we deny them. We deny them here a lot of times. They just go to the county. And to be honest with you, I hate for them to be approved in the county because their density is so much more than ours. And of course, and that's one of the reasons they don't like dealing with us, because we come back and say, hey, I'm not going to give you a 50-foot wide lot. You gotta, our ordinance say 75. I'm not going to give you a 3-foot side setback. You know, it got to be 7.5 feet. So they can't get those things. So they take it back to the county where they can get them and put in more houses.
So can you come back to us and get forceful on the JPA?
Yeah, and then we turn around.
I mean, if I need, I can go throw a tantrum up there, but I mean, you know, when I talked to Clee and Sean, and they all were, no, we need to get this done. So that was back towards November, but we haven't seen any
I did
movements.
mention it, and I will start mentioning it again on Monday.
Yeah, I mean,
JPA.
I'll
I know
start
the
making
talk's supposed
calls.
to start again soon.
Okay.
I don't even want talks, I want it done.
Do what?
I don't want talks, I just want to get it done. I mean,
I will
they like to
about
talk
it
a
again.
lot.
I will be more forthcoming.
I think Groveland finally signed the JPA, so you may want to talk with Groveland, because one of the things we were doing, they was trying to go one city and look at, get Groveland through at the time, and since they did so much, I think they finally decided on theirs and signed their JPA, so you may want to look at Groveland and see exactly what they got in their JPA and everything, and how it's working, but,
Okay.
so.
Yes, yes.
Okay.
I will work on that.
Anything else? If not, meeting adjourned. Okay.
Double hit.
Oh, yeah, I have